Hello everyone, and welcome to the webinar. It's great to be with you today. My name's Robyn Hill and I'm facilitating this group panel discussion with three fabulous senior leaders, who I will introduce very shortly. The format for our webinar today is we're going to, I will shortly put my slides up and give you a few introductory comments to open up the discussion. I'll then invite our three panelists to each introduce themselves, and then we'll get into the discussion. And we've got about half an hour of panel discussion. And following that, there's Q&A. So at any point, you can put questions into the Q&A function for us to have a look at that point. Also, thank you to everyone who's already given some questions. As part of the registration, we've got those and we've pulled some key topics out from those questions. So hopefully we can give a few tips and tactics for each of those areas. What we can't answer, please bear with us because we've only got an hour, but we're going to try and get to the heart of your questions. So I'm just going to share my screen now. So firstly, I just wanted to thank the Women's Infrastructure Network for hosting this event, which was originally conceived by Sarah Lang and I, and delighted that this has been able to happen. I just wanted to acknowledge the sponsors, so Denton's and Kensington Swan and Becker as the foundation sponsors. I'll just tab along. Bear with me. So my name's Robyn Hill and I'm an accredited mediator and conflict coach, and I train in workplaces in terms of courageous conversation skills. I started my career in my undergraduate degree was as an architect in architecture, and I spent 5 years as a graduate working in architectural practices. So I have some feel, even though it's back in the dark ages, of the types of conversations that you all have in your roles. I work only with workplaces, and I'm very much focused on the space of trying to maintain or strengthen relationships. And I see courageous conversations as essential skills and not soft skills. They're hard to learn, but so important. And not only as individuals, but as teams and organisations, I think they're essential to us all being able to fulfil our potential. I haven't put the slide up, but I find it quite an interesting piece of research that's around New Zealand population personality. So it compares the New Zealand population on various characteristics to other countries. And while we sit very much looking the same as other countries in terms of other factors like introversion and extroversion and things like that, we as a population are just about off the scale when it comes to being accommodating. So we're very, very accommodating. Which is not necessarily a bad thing to be, but in the terms of having difficult conversations or managing conflict, it does mean that we tend to be a bit avoidant or leave things a bit too late. And my experience in the work I do is that, unfortunately, instead of staying with the go hard on problems, soft on people, delays or reluctance to actually have difficult conversations can actually make it quite hard on people. And the words that always come through from people I coach or train are, how can we do it authentically, confidently and effectively? So I'm really delighted to have three senior women who can give us some tips and advice from their experience to do that. So very quickly before I introduce our panel, just wanted to touch on the definition of communication, because many dictionaries, I don't think, go far enough. They talk about imparting or conveying of ideas and knowledge, whereas my preferred definition is the sharing of meaning. And the sharing of meaning requires us to be curious, requires us to give out information or give part of ourselves, as well as be open to receiving it. And conflict is an opposition of struggle, but not inherently bad. So if our New Zealand population is a bit reluctant to have difficult conversations, we also lose out on some of the real benefits and opportunities that can come from constructive conflict. So one of my favourite phrases here is, peace is not the absence of conflict, it's the effective management of it. And I think one of the other things, just to set the scene, and this comes up all the time if I'm in a mediation, is that before we go into any difficult conversation is being mindful of our own lens. I often use the metaphor of a coin. So if there's two people in conflict, the idea that each is looking at a different side of the coin, and that the courageous conversation is about flipping that over so both parties can see the other person's perspective as well. So I'm now just going to flick out of here and introduce our panelists. Mayuri, can I ask you to introduce yourself first? Welcome.
Kia ora. My name is Mayuri. I lead the New Zealand business for Arab. I've worked in the infrastructure sector for the past 21 years. I have worked in regional government, central government, and the private sector. The roles I have had in these organizations have had leadership and political elements that have meant that I've had to work on these tough conversations for a period of time. Thank you, Robyn.
Thank you very much. Sarah Hayden, and I just want to acknowledge the New Zealand Institute of Architects for very helpfully facilitating this introduction for Sarah to be on the panel today. So over to you, Sarah.
Good afternoon. Hi, everyone. My name's Sarah and I'm a registered architect by trade. I work for a company called JazzMax, who are architects, interior designers, landscape architects, urban designers and wayfinding specialists. We're a reasonably large company, about just over 200 people, and involved in a lot of the design of a lot of large infrastructure projects throughout New Zealand. Where I sit within that is leading our health practice group, and we work on a lot of projects with health as its core function. And I guess in doing that, we work with a lot of people and a lot of project teams, both within JazzMax and the project partners that come along with that. I think as architects, we're involved in a lot of communication, albeit in meetings, but also drawn communication. So a lot of what we draw has to be interpreted by many people and contractors. And I think as a result of all that communication, every now and then, there's a bit of miscommunication or misunderstanding. So that's often for us where the conflicts arise, and communication is key.
Thanks very much, Sarah. And finally, last but not least, Sherry.
Kia ora tātou. My name is Sherry Lechner. I've spent nearly 28 years in the infrastructure industry, all of that with Fulton Hogan Construction Company, Australasian construction company. I have been involved with our regional business and major project business for the last 13, 14 years, and I'm currently construction manager for the North Canterbury Transport Infrastructure Recovery Project, spending the last 4 years in the lovely Kaikoura region. And courageous conversations in the infrastructure industry, you have them every day. They're staff on site, subcontractors, suppliers, clients, designers, they're everywhere. So learning to deal with courageous conversations and conflict is a skill that everyone needs to know. Thanks, Robyn.
Thank you very much, Sherry. And feel free to the audience to address questions to either the entire panel through Q&A or individuals if you've got a specific question for one of us. So one of the sets of questions from attendees that came through at registration was around how to prepare for a difficult conversation. So I thought that might be a good starting point. People have talked a little bit about, how to approach them, particularly if you're shy or embarrassed easily. I've got, what would be particular conversation starters that might be useful. So Mayuri, can I start with you? If you've got some either story from your background or advice on how you approach a difficult conversation.
Kia ora. Thank you, Robyn. I was thinking about these questions and I thought what would be really helpful would be to share a recent example where I've had to work through this. So I had recently come to a crossroad in my career when I was finishing up in a role, and the CEO of the organization, who had taken interest in helping me grow my skills, had reached out to me and wanted to talk through a potential opportunity for me that could be amazing. So here's the boss, here's someone I really respect and someone who I really want to work with long term, but we might not come to the same outcome at the end of whatever conversation we were going into. So I had to work out how I worked through a series of tough conversations to work out what I wanted and what was best for me, what was best for the organization, and, through a journey. So we landed at the right place for both me and the organization. So for me, some of the things I really had to sort of dig deep and find was to really start with my heart and be really clear on what I was looking for from the conversations, and then really spend some time to listening to what the other person was looking for from the conversation, and trying my best not to put my own bias on it, but giving the person the space to express how they saw the picture. Then there's something about trying to get some alignment between where you want to go and where they want to go, and you taking your time through it and bringing your values into how you work through that conversation, and just making sure at any given time when you're feeling like you're under pressure to make a decision, you pause and go, well, actually, am I under pressure right now to make a decision in this conversation? Can we pause it and come back to it? Because we can actually get a better outcome for both you and me in how we work through this problem by just giving ourselves some space to work through it. So that's just a little bit of a reflection from me, Robyn.
Thank you very much, Mary. Really interesting points in there, and I think because I'll just pick up on one of them, there were many of them, but when we're in conflict, when we're not in conflict, we're usually quite frequently, and life's happening quite fast, we're listening to respond, and we have to. When what Mayuri picked up on really nicely there was that when we're in conflict, we have to slow it all down because we're trying to listen to understand as opposed to just respond. And that often creates some slightly awkward silences that we need to try not to fill. So thank you very much for that. Sherry, can I ask you for either an experience around preparing or some things that have worked well for you?
Thanks, Robyn. You stole quite a few of my points there that I had lined up to answer this question. Preparation is key, I think. I know even myself now, when I go into some of these conversations, I still feel uncomfortable having to have them. And I've found the best way to help myself through that, number one, is to prepare. What are we talking about? Why? What are we trying to achieve in the conversation? So preparation is number one key for me, and running scenarios past others that obviously if things are confidential, you need to keep it that way, but you might be able to run it past someone else if you've got any worries or concerns about how things should go. The second biggest learning I've got out of a lot of these conversations is listening to understand. I've had several disciplinary related conversations with my team over the years where listening to understand the problems has actually ended up in an outcome that I wouldn't have seen at the start of the conversation. There's so many things that go on with people, organisational factors that pop into behavioural problems that you can actually work through and have really good outcomes as long as you just listen to understand and go from there.
Thank you very much, Cherie. Sarah, lucky last on that topic.
Some of the tips that I noted down, I guess, for preparing for difficult situations is having a plan and measuring yourself against that, knowing where you are. A lot of what we do is around following a design process and delivering what we've said, what we're going to do or what we've promised we're going to do. And often issues arise out of our ability, I guess, to follow that process, or it's been affected in some way. So yeah, having a roadmap and being able to measure yourself against it is always key for us, and knowing whether you're behind, ahead, and what the potential reasons are. And sometimes you need to be able to be brave enough to say why you're not able to deliver or what's impinging your way to be able to do that. I can think of a recent, well, probably not so recent now, an older project where at the end of preliminary design, a specific design stage, there are just simply too many decisions on that project outstanding that if we progressed into the next stage, it just would have presented too much risk both to us and to the project and to the client. So being able to express those concerns and being honest and forthright about it's really, really important. Another thing is being prepared and knowing your subject matter really well. Quite often things come up in one or two areas, things start to bubble up, and often you need to be able to do a bit of a deep dive. And we've got lots of people working on different aspects of projects, and you can't be over everything in detail, but occasionally you do need to jump in and figure out what's going on to be able to proactively problem solve and take the lead on that. And also knowing where your weak points are and not being afraid to admit that. I mean, that can be difficult because there's liability around that as well, but it goes a long way to your credibility, I think, if you're willing to take ownership of a problem and what you might want to do about that.
That's fantastic, Sarah. Thank you very much. And I just want to pick up on, you know, the deep dive stuff, because it is really important. And obviously when sometimes people try to deep dive, I find when I'm in mediations where that's not their actual specialist area. So it's all about knowing what you know and knowing what you don't know, and bringing in the right people can sometimes prevent a conflict. So remember also just from my days working in architecture is that sometimes people would race very quickly to the contract clauses and it would become a debate over those words. Don't know if that still happens, but it was sort of trying to bring it back. And I thought one of the key questions I often get asked in my job is, how do you actually invite someone to a difficult conversation? And so I kind of had three things, and Sarah picked up on this as well, is having a really clear goal. And if it's an email invitation, I always suggest that the first sentence is a clear goal, which is a shared goal, you know, something that both parties will see as a positive. The second sentence is envisaging success. So you're putting the outcome of a good conversation. So you're not saying what the solution is, but how a good conversation would flow. And then also to use topics that are neutral is how I call it. So third sentence is, you know, can we get together to discuss expectations or topics that take any potential blame away from, or potentially put blame on anyone. The advantage of inviting people in that way is the other person feels welcomed into the conversation and doesn't come to it feeling defensive, like they're going to have to defend themselves. So that was just a few tips from me on that topic. Is there anyone else on the panel with anything further they wanted to add to that preparation? I'll take that. I'll just cover another couple of things. Oh, Sherry, hello.
I just popped up there. Yeah, one of the other ones that I had there, which I thought was quite pertinent, is don't delay in these conversations. I think the biggest thing that I learned early on in my career is, and it started off as things as basic as people getting bitumen on their cars. And we go, and when were we going to clean it up? And if you left the note sitting on your desk for a week, the person would become that angry and frustrated that you hadn't made contact, that the end of the solution would be a lot more costly. And obviously more distressing for the other person. But if you ring the same day, you actually find you can get a better outcome. So that's one of my big things, is don't leave these conversations.
Thank you very much. And that is absolutely brilliant advice. I think a lot of the conflicts that I help resolve have been left too long. And the recommendations from many people who study and research conflict is to instigate the introduction within 2 days of the triggering event. It doesn't mean you have to try and resolve the whole thing in 2 days, but if you wait more than 2 days, if it's between 3 and 5 days, people start wondering, when trust starts to diminish, and the longer out, the harder it is to resolve. So thanks very much, Sherry, for that, because it's absolutely critical. I also thought I'd just, the other parts of preparing, obviously we've, the panel have talked about having a clear goal for the conversation. That's really important. Checking in with yourself. I've heard people talking about that, checking in what your needs and values are, what might trigger you. So if someone's got quite different needs or values, that could potentially trigger you. Thinking about then reflecting in the other direction around what those the other person's needs might be, and then crafting that invitation carefully so that it's welcoming, and I think Sherry's point of running it past someone else who you know is objective, and you can just talk to them about it and about your preparation is a really good help. Mayuri.
Kia ora, Robyn. I was just thinking about when you were talking about the triggering. I think that's one of the things that I find it's really important to bring your best self-awareness of how you're feeling when you're in a conversation, and managing how you're feeling to make sure your conversation doesn't get impacted by how you feel, but you're able to work through that.
Mm-hmm.
The self-awareness piece is something I think that's well worth investing in if you haven't already.
I totally agree, and when we get into the next phase, we will be talking about tips for managing or being aware of ourselves being triggered and how we can respond, and it's really, really relevant. I've just had a question pop up from here. What was Robyn's third sentence in the email to invite to people? So the third, I'll just jump out of that. So the third point was after the goal, envisaging success of what a successful outcome, not giving the solution because you don't know what that's going to be yet. The third is to identify, say, these are the topics that'd be great for us to discuss, and you try and make them neutral and mutual, because you don't want anything like, I want to discuss the fact you haven't delivered here. It might be that the topic might be timelines or delivery expectations or something like that. So it's about giving some topics, because nothing worse than coming to a meeting where you don't know what you're going to be talking about. I also just picking up on that sort of inviting people to have a difficult conversation. This doesn't matter whether it's with a client or a colleague or a senior manager, is to allow them as much time as you've had to prepare, because you'll have done a lot more thinking around it, and that other person needs that time to do that sort of preparation as well. Sometimes I get asked how should I do it? How long do I need? Well, you know, you might only need 10 minutes if it's not a terribly complex issue. But if it's a really sensitive issue, I will always personally sleep on it overnight. I will always communicate and connect within the 2 days. But certainly I will take that time, and it's picking up on what Mayuri was talking about. I will take the time to check in with myself, how I am responding, what the impact of this is having on me, how I might be triggered moving forward, have a few strategies for how to actually manage that if I am going to be triggered, but also to do that empathetic sort of thinking of what might they need, what's a good environment that would be comfortable and friendly for us to have this conversation. So I key point there really is trying to make sure you do allow the other person a similar amount of time, and that whatever you put in that introductory email is clear on what the topics are, even though they're mutual and neutral, and that when you start the meeting, there's no surprise topics introduced. You have to be very consistent so that the other person still feels safe and comfortable and invited into a conversation. So I think that's been really helpful. Thank you, panelists, very much. So I just want to move now into actually managing once you're actually in the conversation. And I might try it from a few different angles, given the questions. If there's a panelist who's been in a conversation where they've had to talk to someone who's in a more senior role to themselves and had any tips for doing that once you're in that conversation, bearing in mind that there is a power imbalance there. I saw Mayuri pop up, but she's disappeared on me again. Did you have any thoughts on that?
I did, Robyn. I just playing with the video camera. Robyn, I think this is a really good one because you're right. There is a power imbalance, and there's a sense of this person is either your boss or there is a sense of value there that you're perceiving as you walk into that conversation. I think a really important thing is to work out who you are and what you want from that conversation and what they might be looking for. So take all the artificial boss, subordinate, all of that language away, neutralize it, work out what you're looking for from the conversation, work out with them or in whatever listening way you can what they're looking for, and just take away the things that are making you feel like there is an imbalance of power.
Absolutely, yeah.
I definitely agree with Mayuri there. I think if you are really focused on what you're trying to solve and you forget about the gender, the positions and everything like that, and you can just keep focused on being on solving the problem that you're actually trying to solve, that goes a long way towards getting what you want and out of the conversation in the first place. So it's hard, but yeah, doable.
Sherry, did you have anything you'd like to add to that topic?
Yeah, one last thing, and could possibly apply to all of these conversations too, is be genuine. If you're obviously talking to someone that's superior to you, they know you, they're going to know what you like as well. So yeah, be genuine.
Yeah, I think those are all really good points, and I think if I always encourage leaders to think quite carefully if someone's approached them. So a neutral environment, if it's a conflict between different levels. So, if you can have it not in that person's office where there is already that power dynamic, and somewhere where everyone can give their full attention. So not with people sitting in front of their computer or with their phone, it's got to be human to human, and that kind of breaks down that sort of but it's quite quickly the positional relationship. Yeah,
I think within our practice group, occasionally you get a murmuring from someone who feels that they can't raise an issue, and I think it's really important to establish a culture with people who work with you or around you that they do feel like they can raise anything, and that's not an issue, and it would never be an issue. I think it's important for any organisation for people to be able to talk about the challenges or the issues in a way that they feel comfortable. So it's really important to encourage that.
Yeah. And that's why I think embedding these skills or the tactics and tips we're discussing is so important. They have to be organisation wide. And I just thought it might be useful for me to talk a little bit about conflict imprints at this point, because we all come individually with a conflict imprint, which is usually unfortunately negative, and it relates to an experience we've had in the past which has been negative. So conflict hasn't gone well, we've inadvertently hurt another person, or there's been consequences or even retribution, and that's sort of we hold on to that. And similarly, teams have a conflict imprint, how they're used to their dynamic and organize, and so you can sometimes find conflict between teams because they have that different imprint. And then organisations have, as Sarah's mentioning, their own way of how they do this. So I think they're quite interesting discussions to have, both with yourself. Recognize. So my imprint is flight. It used to be. I'm hopefully learning to do it differently. But my first reaction, because that's my family history, is that. And then you see teams where one will be quite aggressive coming forward and the other will retreat. So sort of having conversations with each other and between teams, I think it's a really positive thing to do. People understand where people are coming from and can think differently about it. Anything further any of you would like to add on that topic, or I'll get into the next topic. Okay, so we had some questions come up around managing and leading team conflict within teams. So where you've had team members in conflict and how you as leaders might have approached or managed that. Sarah, would you like to kick off on that topic?
Sure. I think it goes back to what I was just saying earlier about ensuring you've got a culture where people feel that they can raise issues, and that does happen from time to time. And I guess it's important to always hear both sides of the story, and it's often around communication or miscommunication, or someone said something to offend somebody else and they've never really meant anything by it, but they're trying to solve a problem. That's just the way they may have gone around it has offended someone. So it's really just having conversations with those individuals and maybe coaching them around how to change their phrasing or how they approach a particular topic that's potentially less offensive. But I think with all your teams, you need to have that underlying sense of trust that you're all in it together, you're working towards the same goal, and occasionally people do step on toes, but they don't mean anything by it. And that's where I think the goal is really important. You're all in this together and you're trying to achieve the same thing. So that's actually the most important thing. But you need to be able to have a culture where you can challenge each other. I guess with what we do around design, there's a lot of opinions, and you need to be able to debate and critique those designs. So yeah, it's important to be able to challenge one another in a constructive and positive way.
I'm just wondering whether Mayuri or Sherry, you've had an experience where you've come into a team where there has been conflict and it's affected the whole team, and you kind of have to you need to hit a bit of a reset button to sort of, I don't know if either of you've got an experience in that space. Nodding, yes.
Yes, absolutely. Robyn, I really support the points that Sarah was making around teams. And when I've worked with a team where there is conflict, what I've found really helpful is to get each of the members to consider the other person's perspective. So stand in the other's shoes and experience what they're experiencing, and what does that feel like? And how does that, you know, how does that look now that you've sat in the other or stood in the other person's shoes and experienced the conflict or the issue? And then how would we go about addressing this problem? So bringing some perspective of the other party, I find, is often a good way of neutralizing or daylighting the issues.
Cherie, you are nodding away.
Yes, completely agree with my lovely panelists here. One of the things that I see quite often in working in big teams and working within a larger organisation that has multiple teams is actually communication between those teams. And these days, with emails and computer systems and all of that kind of stuff, there's not actually a lot of face-to-face interaction through some of this conflict, or not so much conflict, but just working through issues or trying to come up with solutions to problems. So one of the biggest things that I've found is really successful is getting everyone out of that email trail trap, really, and getting everyone in a room and actually saying, right, we're all here for the same reason. Now, can we work step through everyone's challenges and through the solutions? And actually you find that quite a few, most of the time, will actually lead to a positive outcome.
Yes, fantastic. And I think I'd add, because there was I think Mayuri, you brought up, and it's come through consistently, of looking at things from other perspectives. So there's a technique called triple description thinking. You don't need to understand the title of it, but it's a process of asking questions with a team where you take them from how do you feel about it to how do you think the other person feels about it. The third part is, how would the organisation see this, and how would it fit with the organisational direction? And the reason that third part's often really important is because when we're in tension and conflict, it does tend to come quite a bit about us personally, and that sort of lifting it up to an organisational or a team goal perspective can help people lift out of that and start seeing it a bit differently. Otherwise, I thought that was all really good. Anyone like to add anything further on that topic?
I'm just recalling an area of the business that we were looking at a couple of years ago, but where we used a workshop environment to be able to reset where a team was at. So occasionally, and we've got a couple of facilitators in the office that are quite good at facilitating that process. So I guess if people are finding particular challenges around their team culture or managing large amounts of conflict, is potentially bringing in an external facilitator and mapping out what they think the challenges are and facilitating a process to enable their team to understand what's going on, but also to pave a way forward. That can be a really useful mechanism, we've found.
Yeah, that's a really good point. It's also, I've found sometimes where the conflict or tensions, because they could be underlying, you suspect they might be personality or communication style issues, and that leads to the conflict, is to, support people to do or understand their, there's a lot of online free little mechanisms to sort of talk about it, but I am going to provide a free resource to everyone on the call today, which is just outlines 4 key different communication styles, how those people talk, how they like to be spoken to, and what would trigger them. So that hopefully a little bit of resource, but often in teams I find it's as simple as that. The issues that come forward are more symptoms of the underlying, of people just have a very different way of talking or presenting themselves. So, well, thank you very much. And I can see we've got about 5 minutes before we move into the Q&A. So we had a few questions around gender differences in terms of conflict. So what's one of the questions here? Any particular tips for dealing with a conflict as a woman with male colleagues, particularly when you're in a position of responsibility? Your answer may be nothing.
I think everyone's own experiences are quite different, but and I think for me it relates right back to school. You know, I chose subjects that were often more heavily attended by boys than girls. Going through construction, it's generally weighted on a male side as opposed to a female side, although architecture seems to be slightly more even in its diversity. But yeah, I think I've never viewed it as being a barrier, and also having progressed through my career with colleagues who have, and male colleagues who have been extremely supportive of, or have been supportive of each other as we progress through that. And you know, I've had periods where I've taken off a year to raise a child, and then you're back into it, and that's never really been an issue. And I think fathers these days are way more involved in the upbringing of their children as well, which is super healthy. So I think I'm confident that those issues are getting easier and easier. Occasionally things pop up, but yeah, I'm very optimistic, and I think every woman should be optimistic.
Sherry.
Yeah, this is an interesting topic around diversity of thought, really. I think earlier on in my career, I needed to be heard, and I felt that I needed to be heard, and actually I didn't need to be heard. That was just something that was an internal trigger in my own head. Nowadays, I think that I have a truly unique perspective on a whole lot of things, and I actually celebrate that I have a unique way of thinking about things that is actually different to some of my male counterparts. So, you know, my real advice in this space is just to be yourself, be authentic, and just acknowledge that you do think slightly differently on some things than others, and that's just not gender related either. It's throughout the whole diversity spectrum, really.
Thank you very much. Mayuri.
Thank you, Robyn. I really support what Sherry and Sarah have been saying, and I really like that piece. You know, finding out when you're in this in a conversation, your own lens on the male-female thing, is that coming to play? Can you park that to the side and think about the problem we're trying to solve, or the outcome we're trying to reach, or what you're wanting from it, and make it a less personal, more about what it is, and then work through that? And is that possible? And for me, I think that way it takes it away from some of the other dynamics that could be at play.
Yeah, no, I'm very supportive of that. I think it's part of that, going back to that slide I showed, you know, about knowing your own lens of the world, is, you know, if you're just approaching it as human to human and being yourself and, you know, authentic and all of those things, because sometimes otherwise our own preconceptions around stereotypes and various things can actually be a barrier for us solving that. So suspending that. And there's another phrase that I use quite often, which is impact eats intention for lunch. For me, that's, you know, if you feel something's happening, ask open-ended questions to test it out, because your assumption might have taken you in quite the wrong direction quite easily. But all of the tips that the panel have been giving today, I think, you know, there's some very practical things to do. You know, if you prepare well and you know your goal and you follow those steps, it doesn't matter whether you're talking to a client, a colleague, a family member, it's the same process, and it's respectful and open, and it works just as effectively. Anything, we've got 1 minute before I open up to questions. Any final tips and from our panelists before we go and answer some more questions from our audience?
Actually, I was just remembering a couple of years ago, we had some leadership training at JASMAX, and it was externally facilitated, and we did a module where we looked at the Myers-Briggs personality types, which was so enlightening for our organisation and the people that you with every day as to how people communicate in the way that they do. So that, I think that has gone a long way towards us understanding each other. And I'd highly recommend, if anyone has the opportunity to getting any of that training, it's really, really worthwhile.
And I support that, and I'd say that not necessarily the full Myers-Briggs, but our communication styles and personalities change based on our roles. So we might have quite a different communication style with our family to at work. And I know from shifting from being a graduate architect into doing what I do now, my communications and my profile has changed quite a lot. So it changes over time. So I think it's really useful to kind of do it at various occasions, through your career, just to check in and see and have that self-awareness. Thank you so much. So I'm going to open up for questions now. Tara, I might need your help with this. In the background, I just click, oops, here we are. So, okay, so got quite a long one here. So I've had to bring up a few points in regard to race in the last year at work, specifically how the majority white leadership team were handling discussing racial issues, i.e. not too well in some situations. I'm fairly confident in discussing race issues. It's something close to my heart and that I'm passionate about. It also does impact directly as a WOC. My question is, how do you think we can create open environments at work where we don't need to worry about backlash? It's always a worry for me in the workplace and in my personal life that someone's going to respond well at first, then flip in a few weeks or even straight away. There's lots of questions in here. So how do we handle this and create open and safe communication spaces? As a junior at work, I'm still a grad, without having to worry about the impact on your career, especially when softening the context in a race discussion can often lead to having no effect on solving the solution. So I'll open up, there's some really interesting points in there. So having difficult conversations around race, and particularly when you're just starting your career. Is there a panelist who'd like to have a go at that first?
Yeah, I could just pop in here, Robyn. I think with some of these bigger issues, it's really good to actually find someone in your organisation that you feel comfortable talking about these things with, and seeing the best way to go about this. So someone might be able to say, well, how about if you want to talk about this, you can actually go through this route to bring up the problem and have a chat around it. Or even someone that might actually help you sit down and formulate a plan to be able to bring up the conversation. So it's just using the people you know around you, your network, and who you do feel comfortable with having those conversations.
It's a really good point. Thank you, Sherry. Mayuri or Sarah, did you have any comments on that question?
Oh, sorry, Mary.
Okay.
I was going to say it relates back to what I mentioned earlier around ensuring your company has a culture where you're encouraging diversity of people and thought. And if those issues are bubbling up, it's a sign that maybe you're not communicating as an organisation very well around the importance of that. So it is really important that people feel that they can raise issues, and if they don't feel like they are being listened to, I agree with Cherie, finding a person or an avenue where that can be raised up to management and leadership level is really important, because organisations need to be able to respond to that. It's really important.
Yeah. And I think if you're early in your career and your you might not know what the mechanisms for those conversations are, and your organisation, absolutely picking up on Cherie's point, is try and have some conversations and find out what's in place or not in place, and how you can positively contribute to those conversations if it's not already quite open.
Yeah, I think one of the pre-questions also asked around, you know, I guess all of us benefit from working in large organisations where you have the support networks available to you to overcome any issues like this. But if people are working in smaller practices or organisations, establishing a network beyond, you know, if you're in a small company of, I don't know, 10 to 20 people, having partnerships with other small organisations so you can extend outside of that and get the help that you need, or with your professional bodies. We've got the Institute of Architects, who are a great pillar of support for us and for small practice. So it's making sure you've got those networks available to you.
Mayuri,
Thank you,
anything
Robyn.
to add?
I was thinking about the question around the young grad asking the career limiting sort of tangent that bent to it. I think it's really important, if you feel like you are in an environment where you feel it's career limiting, to ask some of these questions, that you look around your environment and find someone very much like what Cherie and Sarah have been saying, that that in my language I'd say would be aligning to your values. You'll have a gut feeling, gut instinct around someone you can confide to, you can talk to, and you'll see some values alignment to how you think, to start exploring some of this, to get some good advice. I think it's worrying that young people feel like that, and it's the sooner you ask for help and align with someone who aligns with your values, would really help open up the conversation and get some support.
Yeah, support's really important, really important. Thought I'd just touch on micro racism as well, because that's something, for those who aren't familiar with that term, it's sort of inadvertent racism. So the person making the comment is not trying to be racist, but the comment they make has a negative response. And just to give you an example, you know, I've had a client who just said, if I do something well, I get overpraised, because it's as if it's, you know, because I'm Maori, I'm kind of, you know, and for her that's really insulting, because she wants to be treated the same as everyone else. So it's kind of a big topic, but I thought if people are particularly interested in that topic, I can share an article with tips on, if you're on the receiving end of a microaggression, how you can positively respond to that. So for anyone who's interested in receiving that, I might include it actually with the resources, just for everyone's reference, but that's quite common from a racial perspective. And it's usually just because we've got our own lens on things, and we're not able to pull that down long enough to see the other person's perspective and the impact that might have. Okay, so we've got, I'm just going to quickly answer this question of what if the conversation is face-to-face, not by email. I hope I didn't give people the wrong impression earlier when I was talking about the email invitation. I'm all for face-to-face. Email is not the way to respond to conflict. So it's really just if you're using that mechanism for an invitation. We've got, when a topic or situation has gone wrong, there is a conflict or someone is upset, what is a polite and appropriate way to end the conversation in order to resume another day when the parties have cooled down? Would anyone like to have a go at that one?
I'll have a crack.
Thanks.
I don't think anyone should be afraid to, if they feel a conversation is not constructive, or people are too upset, just to halt that conversation and reflect that that situation back to them, that, you know, the situation's either untenable or too stressful for people. So it's pretty easy to be able to stop that and just say, well, we can pick it up at another time. When people are in a better headset. Yeah.
And I'll often create from the outset, if it's a conflict management or resolution meeting, the idea that if anyone wants a break, just to let me know. And you can do this if you're one party to the, and take micro breaks, 5 minutes, where people can just go away and have a quick break or get back if they're feeling triggered, and then come back to the meeting. So it's not something we normally do, but if it's something where someone's emotional, but otherwise things are going well and they just need a few minutes, it's good to try and keep the conversation going, assuming it's safe, obviously, and that the reason for closing that conversation is not because it's moved into unreasonable behaviour. And if people are wondering, I have a little rule that I do, which I call the 90-10 rule. So if you're looking at a situation thinking, is this behaviour unreasonable or not? I say, well, what would 9 out of 10 people say, looking in from outside? And if 9 out of 10 said that's not reasonable behaviour, you're not then yeah, trust your head. And if most people would say they're just venting, and it's not unreasonable, then you can try and keep that conversation going. All right.
Sometimes those situations are people just need a place safe to vent. So sometimes you might not be the cause of that anger, but you're there just listening to let someone get that out. So sometimes it is actually good having the uncomfortable silence, sitting there being that person that they're letting go to. So some days it's actually good to stay on, hold on, rather than trying to diffuse or go out to another day.
Absolutely. And if you try and stop someone venting, they'll just about usually shut down. So you don't want that. You're wanting to keep people involved and engaged. So yeah.
I guess it's not unreasonable for people to expect that it might take more than one conversation as well to resolve some issues, depending on how heightened or complex the problem is. And quite often you might spend that first conversation just trying to define what the problem is, and not always, people don't always have the amount of information there that they need to be able to contribute to that. So be realistic that it might take 3 or 4 shots at it to get things resolved. And also if it's an issue between team members, going back, once you've heard about an issue, going back and reaffirming to that person who's raised it in the first place that you have done something about it, and you'd appreciate their feedback if it's an ongoing issue, because I just think it demonstrates to them that you're actually listening, you've done something about it, and that it's important.
Thank you very much. And I see we're coming up to just a few minutes before the hour. So I will start to wrap up now. And I just wanted to thank all of the panelists for we obviously could talk on all sorts of topics. It's been really interesting and really helpful. So I'm just going to quickly drop back to share my screen again to a few slides and then close off. And I'm sorry we haven't been able to answer all of the questions. I'm happy to try and answer some of them afterwards if that's helpful. And I'll talk to Tara about how that happens. But as I say, I'm going to send out some resources that'll come to you via Tara, and you're welcome to touch base if you want to have any pressing questions. And if I don't know the answer, I'll ring one of the panelists. So look, I'll just come back to shared screen. So I won't have time to go through all of the amazing points that have been made, but I thought I'd just touch briefly on after the conversation, because it's just as important. And I think Sarah mentioned there about having further meetings if required. It doesn't have to be one, but similar to the suggestion from the panel that you have someone to run past, whose objective to run past things in the preparation stage. It's also really useful to have a debrief, particularly if you feel you have been triggered personally in that conflict, and then to follow up. So if there has been an agreement or someone has been quite emotionally triggered, obviously to check in and just acknowledge that and make sure that they're okay. So very, very quickly, this is just my one tip is and again, the New Zealand population survey shows that we also like leaping, and perhaps it's because of our awkwardness around conflict, into solution finding really quickly as people who are born in this country. And my recommendation is, if you've got an hour's meeting, to just really try and hold that first half hour to just building understandings. And if solutions pop up, you just put them, say, you know, I always just acknowledge how valuable they are, and I write them down and say, look, we'll come back to that. Because it's actually really important to have exhausted that past before you step over into that future solution based. If you rush into solution, you are way less likely to have a sustainable agreement. It's more likely to fall over. And as the panelists have said, speed matters. So not in terms of resolving the whole thing, but in terms of flagging that in a constructive way that you'd like to have that conversation, and ideally face to face. And so I'm just going to provide you the little infographic, which is 6 steps to planning preparing for a conversation. And I strongly recommend that you, if it's something really worrying you, you only spend an hour on it. You don't spend all night angsting. You just write these things down, and then try and relax. I've also mentioned the communication across personality types, so I'm going to send you that. Have we got time, Tara, for this little video? I'm going to take that as a yes. So I thought it'd be just nice to finish on a refreshing note. So this is a little clip. It's only a minute long, and it's infrastructure being used to create courageous conversations across the Mexican-US border. This was in the BBC in January, so you may have seen it, but I just think it sort of leaves us on a note that says no divide is too big. So I'll just run that now. So that Mexican design company won an international design award for that just recently, and I think it's just a lovely note to finish on. And thank you once again to all my panelists and all of their advice, and to the Women in Infrastructure Network, to the foundational sponsors, Denton's, Kensington, Swan and Becker, and to Tara Daly in the background, who's coordinated all of this. So I hope that that's been a useful session. It's been my pleasure to facilitate it, and thank you very much.